All right, we're going to talk about sex, we're going to talk about shame, and we're going to talk about recovery, this element of basically when people go too far in their lives on one thing and then they need to get better and they oftentimes, go and work on themselves. A lot of things that I bring to the table here is a lot on 12-step recovery because I've been involved in it. But also one of the unique things is I've been a dating coach and a men's coach for 10 years. And man, that adds an interesting dimension to it. So, a lot of the times when we get into this element of sex, we bring this idea of shame or guilt or we've done something wrong. Why? Because there's so many things where things can go wrong in sex in a relationship. And I think we really need to get to this point where we stop having this dialogue of just citing things as black and white, good and bad, and things are wrong and things are right. Because there's so many different things to our sex life that of what it needs to actually be fulfilled. So let's jump into kind of the psyche and the mindset and the model of somebody who may have drank too much, done too many drugs, or maybe had a gambling addiction or something like that, of what happens with your sex life. And guys who aren't in that mode, that's no problem. Just follow along because this is what shaped a lot of the philosophy and ideas of TSL because these are things that I went through. And I always say my biggest bottom that I hit was sexually, okay? There's some pretty bad shit with drugs, so sexually it had to get there. So when you're somebody that, let's say you lived a life where you're doing a lot of drugs, you're dependent upon them mentally, emotionally, physically, or you're drinking, or perhaps you have some other habit where you're really involved in stuff. Perhaps you have porn addiction or one of those things. You're going to do things that move into extremes, and you're not even going to know how you got there. And this is very important to know. So one of the big things when we're looking at good and bad things in society, we go like, well, that's a bad thing. This person made a choice to be there. Well, oftentimes you weren't making a choice to do that specific action. A perfect example of this, I was sharing this with one of my buddies. This is a very extreme example, but it's something that a lot of people can relate with. You're a needle IV user doing heroin or some mix of heroin or something like that, and your buddy shoots up. He doesn't fully finish. He starts to OD and passes out. You see him turning blue. You don't know what to do. You can't do anything because you're getting high. He dies. You take the needle out. You finish it off. And then you go pass out. And when you wake up, you see your still dead buddy. This is something that happens. Like if that situation happens, and it does happen, it's very common for that to happen. That's a horrible thing, right? That's fucking horrible. You walk around with that guilt. You walk around with that shame. That is a really, really like terrible, position to be in. In fact, I know so many people who've been in that position, but I don't know a person, and perhaps I haven't asked them all, but I've never heard this story of a guy going, my buddy was dying, he was ODing, and I went to revive him because he was already high or whatever, and save his life. I know people that were ODing and then they freak out, and it's a group of them, and they call the police or pour ice cubes down his pants, or all these different like junky tricks that you can do to kind of snap somebody back into reality, get the Narcan out. But the thing is that's a lot of guilt to walk around with. You walk around with that guilt in life, you start thinking you're that person. Now, so much of life is absolutely, you made that choice. You have to live with it. You are the human being that now is responsible for dealing with that, whether or not you wanted that to happen in the first place. But it's a situation that happened with all these extremes coming at you, and you fucked up. Okay, nobody really gets it wrong that you fucked up there, okay? So you fucked up, you have to work past that. The problem is that when we run into that with our sex lives, that happens all the time. We're overwhelmed with a charge of emotion. We're overwhelmed with hormones in our bodies. We cannot think straight. We start going nuts, man. And I hear this over and over again with guys who are involved in some sort of 12-step program, and even guys that aren't, and they're like, oh my God, I was thinking about this. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And I started watching porn, and it went from there. And then all of a sudden I want to get hookers, and I want to do all this stuff. And man, that's just like that bad behavior. And that's that using behavior. And that's that addict behavior. No, it is not. That is the behavior of your sex drive calling something that needs to be fulfilled that has been repressed so much it has to have that voice. Okay? And let me get this straight. You can have a repressed sex life when you still have a wife. You can have a repressed sex life when you're still having sex. You can have a repressed sex life when you're still having fulfillment, validation, social acceptability, and all the things that are supposed to make you have a good sex life. Why can it still be a repressed sex life? Because there's a part of you that's still being dishonest with the world. And this is one of those things that I really, really knock about recovery. And it builds such a prison for men and women of how to be sexual with one another, where they just can't open up. It's really, really fucking terrible. Is that we get in this mode of where, wait a minute, we've done some shit. You know, man, if you have been a hardcore drug addict and you're a guy or a girl, you have done some crazy things sexually, just when you're in the moment. Whether it's to get the drugs, whether it's a part of the culture of it, whether it's, you know, just something that happened. Maybe you had no choice in the matter. Maybe you were molested or raped. Maybe something happened when you were a kid, da 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 da. But there are some things that were not flavorful. If you had a drinking problem, most likely you had some bad things too. But things get really, really crazy. We start to think all those things are bad. Now, don't get me wrong, the first couple of years of when I was clean, I didn't argue with anything. I did everything that was within the program. I didn't talk about the problems with drug addiction in society and how people see it. I didn't question so much, right? But then as it kept going, and also being a dating coach and also being somebody who was getting laid a lot, and also somebody when I was using, I had sex in a lot of fucking crazy ways and ended up in some weird situations where I wouldn't want to talk about it to other people, situations where it was like, really bad of me showing a bad side of myself and really bad things happening to me. All right. And when I actually got clean, it was a big, big thing for me, eventually to get to the point where I was like, well, wait a minute. I like a lot of rough sex. I like a lot of choking a woman. I like a lot of a woman where she gets to a point where she's overwhelmed with something. I like parts where I'm being abused back. I like things where, I fucking love like go driving down the street and like looking at hookers or whatever it is. Or I love like the idea of having a girlfriend and then going and fucking somebody else. I had to get to that point where there was a part of those things that I needed to realize was a good side of me. And it wasn't necessarily a bad side of me. And here's where we get to it. Okay. So in order to change my behavior, no doubt, if you're going to screw people over, if you're really harming somebody, that's probably not a good thing. But if you really want those things and you desire them, if you shut that out, you'll be forced to do those things. There's a concept of a higher power in recovery. And if you think you're bigger than your higher power, man, it will humble the fucking shit out of you. Right. And so the deal with that is I really, really believe like sex is a power greater than yourself. It's put within your body. You don't have much choice or options over it. It goes, and then you have to make choices with where it's leading. And that's really where the wisdom comes from, right? That's where you're going to gain that wisdom. So I had to go, man, there's a part of me that's good. There's a part of me that's a true joyous part of my sex drive that's saying, oh, wait a minute, fuck, I want to fuck that chick. I don't care if I have a girlfriend. Oh shit, man, I just got to get this off. I'm going to go look for hookers. I'm going to go watch porn. There's a part of my sex drive with that is actually good. Even though the behavior might be bad, even though the societal view of my behavior might be bad, and even the consequences of that behavior might be really terrible, I need to recognize that part of me is good. Very, very different. And here's where the big conflict comes in with 12-step stuff is you can say putting a drug in your body or taking a drink or whatever the fuck it is a bad action. You don't need it to live. But in order to be a man, in order to be a woman, you need to get control of your sex drive. You need to get control of your sex life. You need to start realizing that is not some evil, sinful voice that is telling you to do something. And you need to get better at translating why you need to resist society and the norm so bad just to get fulfillment. Now, I'm going to share this because a lot of times when we do get into a 12-step thing, our sex lives have been so crazy that we start liking things that you will absolutely see as odd behavior. Like, man, I know so many people that had to have sex for drugs. They identified as being a heterosexual male, but they did a lot of homosexual things. And they did tons of those things. They still identify with being a heterosexual male, but they'll go out and go to gay clubs or whatever, and just to get that outlet out. And it becomes a secret. Sometimes it's something that people feel bad about. But guess what happens when you get a group where you can actually be open with that, where it's not a big deal, and it's just a part of your sex life? Man, that's pretty amazing. Actually, this is a true story. I was joking with a friend about it when we were shit talking back and forth. But I actually know people. I know people that get so desperate sexually. They identify as being a heterosexual male, and they just want to get off, and they can't talk to women, and they can't, or they have sex with women, but their sex life is so divided where they can only talk to women as, beauty and beautiful and love them. But they have such a they just want to have sex in an alley and it's really dirty, raunchy stuff, because those are the things that they were doing when they were using, that they'll turn on Grindr and they'll meet somebody and they'll get a blowjob from a dude. They're like, no, man, I am not gay. I'm not a gay guy. But it's just like, I like that dirtiness. I just can't imagine talking to a woman in that way. Those are a lot of steps to follow, right? But if you keep doing that, action, you're going to start to like it. There's going to be things that you enjoy about it. Or other things with me is I would be in groups where there would be a lot of sex happening, a lot of people doing drugs. And this even carried into when I stopped doing drugs. I would still go to these parties where people were doing a lot of drugs, and there was a lot of intense sex, man. And we were having a lot of sex. There was a lot of crazy things happening, a lot of orgy stuff, a lot of like really, really rough sex. And I was always a guy that would love to see, or would get women to a point where you could call it edging or whatever, but when their choice stopped and they just went with it, and they just in a way saw a sense of freedom with their sexuality. But it was really rough, it was really sexually aggressive, and it was really interesting to see. Still to this day in my sex life, I love seeing that part of a woman, and I think it's a very healthy thing. I don't have to go to these different extremes to get it, and I don't have to take so many steps over maybe what the culture is offering at that time. And even if it's the culture of an orgy, in order to get it. So when it comes down to our sex lives, we really have to see whatever it is. I don't give a shit what it is. Whenever I bring this up, people are like, what about rape? What about pedophilia? If you really have those fantasies, and rape is a super common one, and it rarely gets brought up here on our TSL calls where we talk about like really illegal stuff. But if you have illegal things, you need to find a safe spot in a safe area where you could talk about it. Okay. And so when you're talking about it, and when you're trying to express your sex life, and these things which are illegal or bad or very harmful to people can be done without harming somebody, and can be done without putting you in a spot where you're doing something illegal or that can affect other people and really scar them for life. The interesting thing, though, is if we take it back into a little bit more of a PG-13 area, maybe an R-rated area, maybe even an X-rated area, but not the super high illegal stuff. But if we take a step back and we just go like, well, wait a minute, I really like this girl and I want to see these things. I want to do these things. I want to be a little bit rough. I want to experiment. I want to see her go to a different side and a presence of herself and all these different things that do happen with sex. Here's the big risk that happens. You have one person and you have another person, because sex needs two people to happen. And we're putting a lot of ourselves out there with shit that we've never communicated about, we've never even thought of, and we may have never even felt with another person. And really, that's the beauty of it. When there's a pure experience coming from him and a pure experience coming from her, or if you're gay, him and him or her and her, like if you have that pure experience being put out there, it will truly be unique and defining. Sometimes it's going to hurt you. Sometimes it's going to make you feel good in a way that you can't describe. And the bigger those two extremes are, the more they'll be common. But where we have to get it is to this normal thread, where it doesn't have to be great and it doesn't have to be super bad in order for it to be sex, and it just has to be our expression. And I promise you this, there's a good side of you. In fact, a side of you that is necessary to see, necessary to put out there, that needs to be voiced. And if you don't do that, it doesn't matter if you have the wife, if you have the kids, if you have what society says is a good relationship, if you're empowered by the men and women in your group to be this type of person. It doesn't matter if those things are happening. If you cannot be yourself sexually, right, one-on-one with another human being, you're never going to be happy. That is a horrible way to live life. I really, really believe that the key to addiction, recovery, and all those things is being able to have relationships, being able to have a sex life, and being able to do it. And I wish there were more people talking about it. I want to respect all the boundaries of recovery and all the traditions and all those different things that go out there, because I think they're great foundations for it. And of course, if you're not a 12-step person, don't worry about the shit. But I think that those things are so important. But man, there needs to be a more open dialogue about sex and how we have relationships, and how they don't have to be an either or we have to set these hardcore boundaries and all those things. I get it. I get it at first when we're just trying something out. You got to fake it till you make it. But after a while, you got to integrate who you are. And who you are is probably a big package of a lot of different emotions, sexuality, and experience. And so learn how to have them, and it's a beautiful thing.